Namaskar and good afternoon. Today's topic under the India-Ireland Friendship Lecture Series is 100 Years of Ireland's Independence, Perspectives in Archaeology and the Evolution of the Discipline. Archaeology offers a unique perspective on human history and culture by way of understanding the life of our ancestors. The archaeological findings are used to comprehend the human behavior as well as the reasons behind the development of certain cultures and also the collapse of certain civilization. To give an insight into this topic today, we have with us Mr. James Kyle, who is a state licensed archaeological site director and project manager. Mr. Kyle works in the Irish commercial archaeology sector for Archaeology and Built Heritage Limited. He has over 20 years of experience in all aspects of archaeological practice with additional expertise in the specialist analysis of animal bone, clay tobacco pipes and glass artifacts. Mr. James has extensive experience in managing the archaeological aspects of major infrastructural, commercial and residential projects in both public and private sectors. He is the longest serving chairperson of the Institute of Archaeologists of Ireland and also the chairperson of the archaeological branch of Unite the Union. He is also a member of the European Association of Archaeologists and a member of the EU's Coast Artwork Initiative, a multidisciplinary international team of researchers and experts examining the production and uses of archaeological knowledge and how to maximize its positive impact on the society. Before I request Mr. Kyle to present his lecture, I would like to invite His Excellency the Ambassador of India to kindly address the gathering.
Namaskar, very warm greetings to everyone, especially friends in Ireland and also friends in India who are connected with this program through virtual platform. For me, it's a great privilege to welcome my very dear, very esteemed friend, Mr. James Kyle, whom I had great privilege of meeting some time ago, and I was so impressed by his passion for archaeology and his spirit of innovation. When every country is facing challenges, resource constraints, and all governments all over the world are in the dilemma where to prioritize your resources. And therefore, Ireland has been very innovative. Based on your discussion, I found that Ireland is doing a lot of innovative small initiatives in the field of archaeology. And I thought it would be very interesting for our friends in India to get exposed to what is happening in the field of archaeology in Ireland. Friends, India has enormous wealth of archaeological richness. The study of archaeology in India started in the late 18th century. But the Archaeological Survey of India itself was established in 1861. It's 161 years. And for a country like India, more than 3.3 million square kilometers of land area, and also 7,500 kilometers of coastline. So we have, the Archaeological Survey of India has a really daunting task, both in terms of new work, excavation, new work, but also maintaining maybe around 30,000 different assets. And Archaeological Survey of India has probably world's most diverse set of assets to maintain. Starting from temples to mosques to churches to cemeteries to forts and palaces and even inhabited mounds where people expect that there will be archaeological remains. In terms, and also archaeological museums. So it's a very diverse range of tasks that Archaeological Survey of India has to perform. And we have different circles, maybe more than 30 different regional centers of Archaeological Survey of India focusing on their work, but there is always a conflict between how much they can do, how much they are doing, and how much support the government is able to provide. And that is why I feel that there is great importance of sharing of experiences between India and Ireland. My friend, as you know that India and Ireland have traditionally had extremely close, friendly ties, and the strength has been the people-to-people warmth, the mutual trust, mutual respect and affection, and in the domain of ideas. We have been working together, and I am very happy to and very delighted to mention to you that Ireland has been many areas. Ireland has been ahead of India. Despite a small population, it has been a very creative society, very innovative society. The way you got your independence inspired us. Your constitutional novelties and thoughts, again, they had very profound impact on our constitution. Similarly, as ambassador, I am very keenly observing the fragility and creativity of Ireland in different domains of art and culture and creativity, innovation, creative industries, handicrafts, and also in socio-economic transformation. So it is my sincere wish that people of India and people of Ireland connect, not just trading in merchandise goods, but also exchanging and sharing ideas and learning from each other and working together, supporting each other in whatever manner both sides can. In that context, I'm really grateful that you have spared time. I know you have very hectic schedule and enormous responsibility on your shoulders, but you were very kind to accept our invitation and spare time and share your thoughts. Like everyone else in this connected with this program, I'm also very eagerly looking forward to listening to your presentation. Very warm welcome, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And can I just say it's definitely one of the greatest honours I've had as an archaeologist and as a professional and as a human being to come to speak to you today, to share with you any knowledge that I can and any insight that I might have developed over the course of my career. The title of the lecture is obviously 100 Years of Ireland's Independence, Perspectives in Archaeology and the Evolution of the Discipline. One of the main tenets, I suppose, of how the discipline has developed has been as a result of many different forces within the political landscape and within the personal landscape of Ireland. And I'll go into some of that today, but also I will try to remove myself as much as possible from being subjected to that end. So we start with any good story. Everything has an origin story. So where do we find ourselves in terms of where our story starts? So following the disaster, which was the Irish famine in 1847, we know that in the aftermath of that, prior to that, the Ordnance Survey had conducted a mapping of the country, which gave us an idea of just how many monuments there were in the Irish landscape. So that was undertaken in the 1830s and 1840s. And then, unfortunately, the Great Famine occurred. Following on from that, subsequent mapping effects revealed that up to a third of those monuments were basically destroyed over the course of 20 short years. So we find that from the 1860s onwards, the genesis of our current legislation begins. So we have the 1869 Church Act, the 1882 Ancient Monuments Protection Act. These are all acts of Parliament, and 1892. The cartoon there gives you an idea of the political will at the time. The figure on the left-hand side is the slightly austere figure of Hibernian, and she is being escorted away from the rabble, which passes for Ireland, by her younger, better-looking sister, Britannia. That's just an idea of how our country was portrayed in the political magazines of the day. That was Punch magazine, and I know that India suffered something similar at the hands of that magazine subsequently. So, despite politics, the need to preserve our heritage continued. You can see there the 1898 Local Government Act, 1900 Ancient Monuments Protection Act, 1910 Ancient Monuments Protection Act, and 1913 Ancient Monuments Consolidation and Amendment Act. Accompanied by another one of the political cartoons of the day, which is a vampire bat with the head of Charles Stewart Parnell, who is feasting on the vulnerable maiden of Hibernia. So again, despite the political will at the time, there was obviously a fair degree of will in terms of protecting our monuments and the heritage of this island. So in 1922, the Irish Free State is founded, and sadly the island is partitioned. So meaning that whilst the archaeology doesn't stop at that border, we were effectively cut off from that archaeology and a lot of things besides. So we're left with a country which is effectively reeling from civil war, isolated geopolitically and diplomatically, vulnerable economically, with a damaged cultural identity after 800 years of occupation at the hands of the British Empire. As I say, partitioned, and thus I would suggest that the country was ripe for exploitation to a certain degree. Which leads me on to this figure. Adolf Mar, like his namesake Adolf Hitler, was an Austrian by birth. He arrived in Ireland in 1927 to take up the role of senior keeper of Irish antiquities in the National Museum of Ireland. He was very forward-thinking and very efficient in what he did. He implemented the recommendations of Professor Niels Lisberg on the reorganisation of collections, and otherwise worked to bring order to the museum's holdings. One of his key achievements was the production of a card index of excavations and finds, which is still in use today in the museum. And he also drove a return to active archaeological excavation work, which hadn't occurred in the previous 20 years in the state, thanks mainly to obviously the First World War, 1916 rebellion, and then Civil War and independence. He was recognised by our Taoiseach of the day, De Valera, who appointed him in 1934 as director of the National Museum. He built, at that stage, in 7 years working for the National Museum, he built an international reputation through his creativity and dedication. And De Valera was so impressed with his commitment that he wrote him a personal cheque for a very large sum for an excavation project in Dribble, County Dublin. Sadly, though, in the 1930s, obviously, the political landscape of Europe was changing, and as the Nazi Party rose to power in Germany in the 1930s, Mar joined the party in 1933, and he became the local group leader of the official Nazi Party in Ireland. I believe a recent biography labelled him as Nazi #1. He was later arrested and accused of being a Nazi spy with a claim that he used his position as director of the National Museum to plan Hitler's invasion of Ireland. Although no formal charges were brought, himself and his group basically had the names of 4,000 Jewish people who lived in Ireland, which was a very accurate number, and they used to regularly broadcast political propaganda in Irish because they saw that as a Celtic language and marked it as different to, obviously, English. In addition, in the 1930s, another possible individual who preyed on the country to a certain degree was Ernest Houghton from the Harvard Archaeological Mission. And whilst they did a lot of good work in the 5-year archaeological research program, a lot of that was based in trying to determine the racial and cultural heritage of the Irish people. So, to some degree, eugenics, which is a highly controversial subject even today. The program involved countrywide excavations and examination of prehistoric skulls by physical anthropologists. It was complemented by the physical examination of thousands of Irish people from across the country, and they measured skulls, nose shape, and the grade of hair colour. The main advisor for the project was our previous individual, Adolf Mar, Nazi #1, and director of the National Museum between the period 1934 and 1939. The overall project, as I said, was managed by Houghton, who was a famed Harvard anthropologist at the time, and whose theories regarding biological heritage would now be readily condemned for their racism. So it gives you an idea of some of what was occurring in Ireland during the 1930s in almost like a power vacuum, or at least a political thought vacuum post-independence. And it brings me on to the next idea, which was both Hutten and Mar tried to a certain degree to weaponise our own heritage in order to mobilise the Irish people to the Nazi cause. So the Nazi ideology in general stressed the significance of the Aryan race as culture creators, and their eternal enemies, the Jewish race, as culture destroyers. In place of what they perceived to be an artificial division of society into classes and the world into sovereign states, the Nazis planned to reconstruct Germany, and by extension the world, as a racial community based on people, and to try to redefine international affairs largely on racial grounds. You can see a watercolour of Viking swords that were excavated from one of the Viking cemeteries in Dublin. A photograph there in black and white from one of the 1930 excavations that was conducted by Adolf Mar in Kilmaine and Island Ridge. You can probably make out the sword lying next to the individual's body, so probably a warrior buried there. And the last poster on the right is a German propaganda poster from occupied Norway in 1943. You can see the individual with Nazi helmet on top of a Viking boat with the swastika formed into a Viking shield. So it gives you an idea of just how the lengths that people would go to use the heritage of the country in order to further their own agendas. Thankfully, at the time as well, there was a great appetite for us to preserve our own heritage, and the result of that was the National Monuments Act in 1930. It still underpins our legislation today, with numerous amendments and other acts that followed since, but it was an extremely significant piece of legislation which passed through the Irish Parliament only 8 years after independence, and as a result it gives you an idea of just how significant it was to the individuals at the time that this passed through Parliament in those early days. So as I was saying, the various amendments that have occurred since the 1930 Act have been largely in response to issues that presented themselves during the day. So I won't go into them all, the amendments in the 1954 Act. The 1987 Act is particularly relevant to one of the issues which we are still quite big today, which is metal detection. I'll go into that further. And then again, 1994 Act again, it's concerned with excavation licensing, and the 2004 Act, which is the last amendment to the existing legislation that's passed, is connected with Ministerial Directive and the M3 excavations, which were fairly controversial back in 2003. So this just gives you a brief idea of the various aspects of legislation with gaps in between them highlighted. So the gaps generally correspond with an area, a period of economic downturn in the fortunes of the country. So by extension, you could almost argue that prosperity is linked to having good heritage policy in Ireland, and I'd certainly agree with that myself. So just continue and bring us right up to the present. We have an 18-year gap in accounting, and that is no fault to the current administration, who are trying desperately to get a new National Monuments Act through, or new National Monuments legislation. It's largely thanks to, first of all, the economic boom and then the economic downturn. So essentially, our legislation's pieced together over 23 pieces of legislation over the last 150 years. So, in addition, we also, during the period in question, we joined the EU, and we developed a lot of our legislation from them. So that just gives you a flavour of some more of the EU-based legislation. Of great importance would be the Valletta Convention and the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. Ireland only has 2 World Heritage Sites, which I think, in comparison to countries of our size, is very few. Considering the amount of fantastic sites we do have in Ireland, I would like to see that improved to give them the protection that they deserve. So just a brief piece on why legislation and protection is important. What you can see there are the 9th century chalice and paten of the Derry Flan hoard. Now, that was discovered in 1980 by individuals with a metal detection device. They had the permission from the landowner to dig, but they were digging on a protected site. It was an old church site that dated back to maybe 1100–1200 years. And when they found these objects, they tried to sell them on the open market. But valuation of another similar port had put a notional value of about 5.5 million on these artifacts. And back in the early 80s, when 30,000 would have bought you a very nice house, 5.5 million was a lot of money. So the battle went to the courts because essentially the Irish state was not going to be held to ransom over 5.5 million for artifacts which these individuals should have dug up to begin with. And as a result of that, then the legislation of the 1987 Amendments Act reacted to that and further prohibited the excavation and the use of metal detection devices. So in terms of how archaeology is regulated in the state, first and foremost authority is the National Monument Service, which currently is part of the Department of Housing, Heritage and Local Government, and they play a key role, or the most dominant role, in the protection of archaeological heritage. They deal with archaeological issues arising at national monuments which are in state care, and the conservation and management of these monuments is the responsibility of the OPW, the Office of Public Works, including visitor services at any of those national monuments that have visitor access. The NMS carry out surveys of known sites and where sites are thought to be located, and they compile inventories of sites and monuments. So effectively, they set up and they carried out a large element of the archaeological survey and the archaeological inventory work that went on in the 1980s in Ireland. They implement the legislation in relation to the protection of monuments and sites, including historic wrecks off our coastline and underwater archaeological sites in lakes or the surrounding coastline. They regulate archaeological excavation. They regulate the use of detection devices, such as metal detection devices for archaeological purposes. So, as for instance, if I felt that there was a need for a metal detection device on a site, I would have to apply for a license to use that device and have a method statement saying why and how I was going to use that. And even then, it could be refused the license on those grounds. So it is very good to know that there is that strong legislation there in relation to that. If we look across the water at our nearest neighbours, Britain, they're still dealing with the laws of trout or trove, in which case individuals can go out with a metal detection device, dig up anywhere in the country, and as long as they prove that they don't own something, they then are declared the owner and they can sell it to the highest bidder. And I would say that thankfully the protection that we do enjoy in this country has saved a lot of artifacts in this country from having that done to them. The National Monument Service also advised planning authorities on development proposals, both large and small, county council development plans, heritage plans, and on individual planning applications that may have an implication for archaeological heritage. They also advise individuals and local groups on archaeological issues, and as I was saying earlier on, they are responsible for the regulation and the licensing of archaeological excavations. So, second of the National Monuments Service is the National Museum of Ireland, which was originally founded prior to the foundation of the state in 1877 by an Act of Parliament, and after the foundation of the Free State in 1922, the old RDS buildings, the Royal Dublin Society buildings of Leinster House, were transferred into state ownership along with that, because at the time they were actually housing the museum's collection since 1877. And Leinster House was chosen to be the seat of the new Parliament, the Dáil. So space had to be found for museum staff and all the artifacts that were formerly located in Leinster House, and a number of exhibition galleries in Kildare Street were taken over for that purpose. So the Museum of Archaeology is still there today. The Natural History Museum was given a new entrance directly onto Marion Street, and the architecture was altered to allow the present opening at the east end and the development of the new staircase. So the Natural History Museum has recently undergone a period of renovation, and it's definitely one of the jewels of the crown of the Irish state, as is the Museum of Archaeology on Kildare Street. Responsibility for the museum passed to the Department of Education in 1924, and in 1984 it was transferred to the Department of Taoiseach. So again, it gives an implication of how important the museum was and is. And in 1993, responsibility of the museum passed the new Department of Arts, Culture and Greltocht, before in 2002 being passed on to the Department of Arts, Sport and Tourism. So both the museum and the National Monument Service sit in different government departments, which doesn't necessarily help the cause of heritage, but I wouldn't say it's significantly harmed either. The Institute of Archaeologists of Ireland, of which the Ambassador has indicated I'm the chair, is the professional representative institute. You can see our mission statement there. Through the representation of our members, we seek to advance the profession of archaeology by promoting development, education, contact, regulation, high standards, and the public dissemination of our work. As I said, we're the professional representative body for archaeologists. So whether they work for the state, whether they work for commercial consultancies such as myself, or whether they're in academia or the museum, we represent everybody, or at least we try to. We're governed by an elected voluntary board on behalf of our members. We're funded by the National Monument Service, membership subs, and by Heritage Council grants. One thing that is very unique about the IAI is that we are an all-Ireland organisation, so we operate in both jurisdictions, Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, which can be quite difficult with different professional frameworks and legislation, obviously north and south. We aren't a statutory body in that we don't make laws, and we aren't a commercial body in that we don't make money. And as I said, we represent all sectors of the profession. So the purpose of the Institute, and of any professional institute, should be advocacy on behalf of the profession and on behalf of the archaeology. Continual professional development of the profession, consultation, representation, projects, work groups, subcommittees, conferences and publications. One of the things that I'm very proud of that we've been able to do and improve year on year despite COVID is the continuous professional development aspect of things. And I think this year marks one of our best years as which is even better than last year. So well, there you can see myself trying to operate a drone over Neath, which is one of the CPD events from a couple of years ago. So it is great to be able to do something like that as a professional. So the next branch of the profession is obviously academia. So we have various universities, UCD, University College Dublin, UCC, University College Cork, Queen's University of Belfast, Trinity in Dublin, and National University of Ireland in Galway, and Atlantic Technical University Sligo, or IT Sligo as it used to be. Sadly, from the point of view of job opportunities, academia jobs are fairly limited. And what I would say is that the knowledge of commercial archaeology and academia is equally so. I know myself in 2006 when I went back to college, the notion was that you had to volunteer some of your time in order to become an archaeologist or to get experience in archaeology. That simply wasn't the case in 2006. We were at the height of the boom, and it isn't the case today either. There are plenty of archaeological consultancies and commercial entities who will offer paid internships and are very happy to pay individuals for doing the work. So in terms of academia then, what I've seen in the last few years is that perhaps we're increasingly gearing academia towards overseas students, possibly at the cost of the domestic profession. What I mean by that is that because our academics are so good here, we get a lot of students from overseas, and they come, they study, and they leave. And what I would like to see here is perhaps more of our own Indigenous people going on to masters and PhDs and coming back to the profession to work. And the last recession saw a huge brain drain on the profession, and we lost a lot of very good, very competent and highly qualified individuals from our profession sadly. And we have we're suffering a shortage of those currently, is what I would say. The commercial archaeological industry, which I'm involved in myself, it has its naissance in the increased development and infrastructure project in the 1990s. So gas pipelines, roads and so on, a lot of those happened as a result of EU money that we were given in the 1980s and 1990s. archaeologists as site directors are licensed, so not consultancy for companies, which can sometimes lead to problematic issues. The peak of the last boom was effectively 2007, 2008, and at the time we had multiple large consultancies working in Ireland and peak employment for archaeology. I think on one source stated on one day back in that kind of time there were maybe 800 archaeologists going to work on any given day in Ireland. If you fast forward that by a short 18 months, following the global economic downturn, at our lowest point in 2010 to 2012, we have maybe 80 archaeologists, so 95% unemployment in the industry. And so you can appreciate why, when faced with that, and faced with limited job opportunities, that we lost so many highly qualified, highly skilled individuals from our profession. The current levels, we are in around maybe 200 to 300 on any given day, I believe. However, there's plenty of fears about sustainability and the cycle repeating itself, especially with a lot of global economic commentators now. We're coming up with the recession word, in the face of, say, last couple of years of COVID and the war in Ukraine. The commercial industry is subject to heavy commercial and economic pressures, as I was saying. And the one thing that we always have to ask ourselves is, does the archaeology come first, or does the bottom line of finance come first? Just a few examples of projects with commercial archaeological elements: offshore cables, oil and gas, wind farms and solar farms, which frankly we're seeing a lot more of in Ireland, flood relief projects, board demolition in the wetlands, commercial residential developments, roads, railways and infrastructure. Just an idea of some of the archaeological assessment techniques that we use. First and foremost, we would use the non-intrusive techniques, so techniques that wouldn't necessarily have any impact at all on the archaeology itself. So assessments, environmental impact reports, analysis of the cartographic sources such as the first edition or the survey map or subsequent editions, geophysical survey, which is non-intrusive, metal detection, again, should be non-intrusive, and LiDAR surveys. In terms of the intrusive surveys then, they're quite old-fashioned in terms of test trenching or test excavation. With the best one in the world towards the non-intrusive surveys, you cannot definitively state something is there until you've actually seen it for yourself, so hence the test trenching and test excavation, and the excavation itself. All of the asterisked words are the licensed activities. So for geophysics, metal detection, test excavation and excavation, you would be required to hold a license in Ireland for those, and the licenses are controlled by the National Mining Service. So just to give you an idea of the effect of the 2008 downturn, on the left hand side you can see a graph of the number of excavation licenses, which peak in around 2006-2007, followed by a rapid decline. And on the right hand side, Construction Purchasing Managers Index, which very closely mirrors the curve. So it gives you a very nice visual representation of how closely the commercial archaeological sector and the construction sector are tied together. One of the other aspects of the commercial profession is the involvement with the planning process. So sites with archaeological potential are often identified by city and county councils on receipt of a planning application. The reason for that is the reason that we could carry out anything like that is to determine the possible nature, extent and significance of likelihood of archaeology on the site and likelihood of the impact of any development proceeding. If planning permission is granted, then the relevant authorities such as Dublin City Council or the County Council will issue a commensurate planning notice, which will speak specifically to the archaeology of the site, or they will issue a request for further information, RFI, prior to making a decision for a grant of planning permission. There are multiple reasons why anyone should engage early with archaeology anywhere in the state. One, it would save time, it will save costs. There are potential planning gains for any project, whether large or small. Archaeologists can give you advice prior to site purchase and prior to site commencement. Also, and I'll touch on this again later on, is in order to prevent negative press. One of the projects I mentioned earlier on was the M3 road project, and the press surrounding that talked about the road through the hill of Tara, which Tara is obviously the traditional seat of the High Kings of Ireland. The road did not pass through the hill of Tara, it was further away than the existing main road. So, you know, the portrayal in the press is not always a positive thing when it comes to archaeology. Another reason to engage early is to help gain support and trust of local communities, and it enhances the local buy-in of developments. And it, as I was saying, it can control or correct a media narrative and negative press surrounding any archaeology or development. This is just to give you an idea of the differing ways in which archaeology can be portrayed in the media. This is a site I excavated in 2019 and 2020 in just where the Apollo House building was on Dublin Tara Street. So you can see two tweets from people who work in the Irish Times. Their building is right beside us, and they used to watch us through their windows for the afternoon. So you can see that one is reasonably straightforward in that diggers moved into the church. The central one is slightly more emotive, saying for months archaeologists worked with teeny trowels uncovering ancient walls on the Apollo House site. Now there's a digger knocking them down. How does that work? I believe I was watching that digger at the time when we were removing the wall in question in order to inspect the deposits that were underneath it. And then a lot of these issues were put to bed in the article on the right hand side, which straightened the story out to a certain degree. But I know the kind of things that were said, if people had just come to speak to us to start with, we would have been very straightforward and told them exactly what was going on the site. One of the things that the Institute and myself are involved with at the moment, and with our colleagues in the National Women's Service, is the production of professional standards, which by extension are standards for professionals in archaeology. So as a result of the economic downturn, we found ourselves to a certain degree in a rudderless industry, and the discipline is constantly evolving. We have technologies today that weren't present 20, 24 years ago when I started my career, certainly. And as a result, we always need to keep an eye on what's best practice in Ireland and what is best practice further afield in Europe and worldwide. And we always have to ask ourselves, can we do better as a profession? And as I say, the answer should always be an open-minded and emphatic yes. The development process is underway in the Republic of Ireland. I believe our colleagues in Northern Ireland are coming close to the end of their side of the process, so it'll be interesting to see just how any of our professional standards can dovetail with them, because obviously, as I've said before, the archaeology doesn't stop at the border despite the separate jurisdictions. The next aspect of the profession that I'd like to discuss or to talk about is just the unionisation of archaeologists. As I was saying, we lost a lot of very skilled professionals at the end of the boom as a result of the economic downturn. We had archaeological professionals with 10 to 20 years worth of experience, master's degrees, PhDs, who all of a sudden found themselves being offered a minimum wage, the national minimum wage to work. And a lot of people retrained and left the profession, sadly. We need to value ourselves more as finders and excavators and preservers and translators of our archaeological, cultural and historic past, I feel. Something that it has been, that I've seen large throughout my career, is that the archaeology is generally lauded as being fantastic for the professionals, not so much so. And as a result, part of what occurred in the early 2013, 2014 kind of time was the setting up of the archaeological branch of the United Union. And very quickly, they were able to raise the level of wages, and as a result, the condition for professionals improved. So it assisted the career profession. We weren't seeing as many people with maybe 1 to 2 years worth of experience leaving the profession, and it also offered a degree of protection for archaeologists. It's also assisted in policing archaeological excavations, can assist in creating legislation and policy surrounding the welfare of individuals on excavations. All of which will ultimately benefit not just the profession, but also the archaeology and the industry in Ireland. So just to give you a brief kind of idea of some of the technology that we do use. So on the left-hand side, you can see an aerial photograph of Neath, which is, you have the river going down the bottom left-hand side of the corner of the screen, and then the main mount of Neath with the satellite mounds surrounding the tomb. So this is one of the Neolithic tombs dating back to about 3,600 BC, so about 5,500 years old. And on the right-hand side, you can see a modern LiDAR image of the same site, which gives you an idea of more of the landscape surrounding the site. You can see more of the man-made circular enclosures that surround it, and so on and so forth. So this new technology is something that we're very pleased that we are embracing, and it's something that can assist in our recording and protecting our archaeological heritage. Again, from Boyne Valley, just to show you a couple of pictures of what can be revealed from aerial surveys and drone surveys, which obviously 20 years ago drones weren't available. Today, you can buy them in the middle aisle in Lidl, and they are a very, very effective tool in identifying and protecting our heritage. Another fantastic element that's developed over the last 20 years in Ireland has been GIS, the Global Information Systems mapping, the availability of our historic mapping, and online databases of sites and so on. So on the left-hand side, you can see part of John Rock's map of Dublin from 1756, and on the right-hand side, the same area of Dublin with from the 1840s Ordnance Survey, first edition. So in relation to that, the red dots are RMPs, so recorded monuments of places, and the blue dots then are sites of architectural protection. The role of the general public. The general public also has a role in the archaeology in the state, in education, in policy making. We are a democracy, so that there is the capability of people to speak up and to change national policy. Thankfully, one of the things that has come about is a further awareness, and this is one of the fantastic developments during the last couple of years with various lockdowns and so on. People grew a new appreciation for their immediate surroundings, and we've noticed a huge uptick in the amount of people who are interested in their heritage as a result, and communities are aware of the monuments in their locality. So people have become effectively very aware of what is there. They've been very effective in policing and preserving some of the monuments that are in their locality, and they've been very good in reporting newly identified monuments or where older monuments might have suffered some damage. The aspect of community archaeology there is something that has occurred in the profession in the last decade or so, which, when I say community archaeology, essentially it's archaeology for the people, by the people. So people who have an interest in their heritage or might have always wondered what an archaeologist does. They're getting involved in projects. I was very lucky myself this year to be involved in a couple of projects. So the left-hand side, you can see the Dublin Mountains Community Archaeology Project, and on the right-hand side, the left-hand side is with thanks to St. Dublin County Council, the Dublin Mountains Partnership, and with thanks to Dublin Rathdown County Council, and on the right-hand side, with thanks to Dublin City Council, we have our volunteer archaeologists from St. Anne's excavations this year. We were sadly limited to only 5 days, but what we achieved in the 5 days was absolutely fantastic. I would envy something like, as an archaeologist, having a crew of extremely committed and keen volunteers on site like that. It was a breath of fresh air, and it was a fantastic thing for me to experience, let alone the individuals who came to us and who were a pleasure to work with, I have to say. So it's something that's very rewarding for cynical professionals such as myself, but also for members of the general public, and it gives them a greater sense of the archaeology in the local community, in the local area, and their heritage. So, looking into the future, what might the next few years hold for archaeology in Ireland? Something that I would like to see is a legal definition of what is an archaeologist in this country, because this is something that we've been lacking from legislation. I would like to see an increased protection of sites, monuments, and a more visible policing if possible. And also a devolution of power back to a more local level. I think that is already beginning, but I'd like to see that further advanced, because nobody knows a local area like people that are in that local area. I would very much welcome an updating of the Register of Monument and Places, the RMP, using any new technology that is available and might become available. And in terms of monument discovery or damage, an online portal would be extremely helpful in that respect. I would also suggest perhaps tighter controls on excavation licences and increased inspections of those licences, tracking illegal artefact sales online and prosecutions visibly so to discourage it further. One thing I would say about our current legislation that we have is it has not been tried and tested by extensive legal argument, in my opinion, and that is something that the new National Monuments Act will have to undergo, I would imagine. One thing I really would like to see is a greater organisational and jurisdictional cooperation. It's something that I've tried to do as much as possible as chair of the institute, and I'm very happy to say that we have that in place. I would also love to see a sector which values its workers as much as its monuments. And I'd like to see an increase in the public involvement and community archaeology aspects of what we do, and perhaps move ourselves away from biases and perspectives of the past and into a brighter future. So just to finish, thank you very much to Ambassador Mishra and the Embassy of India for the opportunity to speak to you today, and for the vision that the Ambassador has shown to the India-Ireland Friendship Lecture Series.